Right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. Let me get out of the way. Probably a better way. My name's Scott Morel. I've been invited here today as kind of a qualified archivist and a curator of the British Library collections. What I'm here to discuss primarily today is the importance of archives for philatelic research, and so on. Some of the items I'm going to show you today, they're quite radical, and a lot of some of what you'll see, you won't necessarily deem to be most or traditional approaches to philatelic research. So I think you need a little bit of context about where I'm coming from to kind of understand where I'm going. So we're going to do three approaches here. The first segment, I'm going to start with a brief introduction to the British Library's philatelic collections and our content within the British Library as a whole, so you can understand how we come at things slightly different to other philatelic organisations. And then we're going to have a look at some case studies and use these case studies in a way to go the relationship, how you understand postal history, how you define the subject, how you engage with the subject, really has a massive impact on what you can get out of the archive. I think that's a really important point. And then afterwards, we'll take a case study looking at the relationship between sigillography and sound design. So if that's okay, I'm going to start, so if I may. So the British Library, the establishment of what eventually became the British Library's philatelic collections originated with the bequest of Thomas K. Taplin's worldwide collection of postage stamps, telegraph stamps, and postal stationery in the British Museum's Department of Printed Books, following his untimely death in April 1891. During his short lifespan, about 35 years, this prominent philatelist purchased the best collections of the day and absorbed them within his own. So the museum therefore received the collection, which was global in scope and coverage, and almost complete the period from 1840 to his death in 1890. No, almost, okay. Containing countless philatelic rarities, shades, essays, proofs, errors, and varieties. It's probably the only major 19th century philatelic collection that's still intact. Thank you. So responsibility for the collection given to the museum's keeper of the Department of Printed Books. And of course, at the time it came in, the British Museum had no in-house curatorial expertise to manage and after the collection. So what happened was the Board of Trustees appointed the well-leaded philatelist Denny Bacon to the post in May 1892. And he was working at the British Museum for 3 days a week. Bacon's role involved arranging and mounting the collection, as well as writing out for exhibition, because it wasn't all mounted and arranged. And it took him about 8 years to do, and he received about £100 a week of his salary. It was reduced to £75 a week until the project ended in mid-1899. Now, in 1895, the workload quite a significant amount, so struggling. So the Board of Trustees employed an assistant to help Bacon speed up the project's completion, and they employed the lady here, Jane Hamilton. She secured the interview via a friend who was friends with the department or principal librarian of the British Museum. In the job interview, they said to her, can you handle repetitive tasks and do you have attention for detail? She goes, well, I didn't even know I played the violin and they gave her a job. There you go. But she has the honour of being British Museum's first female curator, very first female curator at the British Museum, helped mount the foundation collection of our department, which is something I'm quite proud of. Now, they initially forgot to pay her, but we've thankfully eventually they sorted that problem out. She was paid slightly less, so she was paid 1 shilling 6pence per hour. It was reduced to a shilling from 1897. And we can see here an example of work. There's a bit off for the lighting, but what we have here is the page for the New South Wales section from Tatlin, which is depicted what plate as 1849 essays. And the page provides just an example again of the most kind of rarities that you expect to encounter. It's a lovely example, of course, of Bacon and Hamilton's work. So if you may, thank you. So the museum, the British Museum's acquisition tapping collection generated quite an amount of contemporary interest with the public and are eagerly awaiting its exhibition. In 1897, the future King George V, then the Duke of Edinburgh, even arranged a private viewing of it. But to satisfy public expectation, Bacon actually began exhibiting smaller amounts of the collection within the book presses located in King's Library, British Museum. See here, still go and visit today. And that they started exhibiting tablets material in October 1893 on, so you can see very quickly get material out and turning it with section by section. Now, it's still the same one. By 1899, Bacon completed the work and began considering ways to exhibit the collection in its entirety on a more permanent basis. And following several abortive ideas, they eventually decided that they're going to commission a set of vertical wooden frames containing slides. And each cabinet stood about 6 foot tall. They contained about 396 slides. And they were working on brass rubbers, and each slide contained 4 sheets of stamps, and they were situated in 2 rows, one above the other, which you can see here in the picture. There was a catalogue on the shelf by the case, and there was a table area where they made notes, very functional. And this display method was actually very successful. It stands the test of time. We still use this system today with some modification, but it was also adopted and emulated by others. Smithsonian Museum in Japan and so on. And it's great because nothing's on display longer than it needs to, so nothing's exposed to the light. Oh, it's very, very crisp. Now, this was available in the King's Library during library opening hours. And aside from a small period in the war, it was on public display all the way through to transfer to the British Library in 1997. So acceptance of Taplin's collection had real ramifications. It placed the British Museum firmly on the world's map of public philately. And because of that, you know, coupled with the presence of two preeminent philatelists on the British Museum board, the Earl of Crawford and, of course, the future King, that really kind of focused the organisation attention on developing and letting the Philatelic collection grow. Now, on top of that, looking at the quality of Bacon and how work, the way they were pioneering this mass display, the way that they were pioneering the write-up, it really put the British Museum on the Philatelic global map, if you will. So as a result of that, of course, the organisation received additional Philatelic collections by donation, bequest, and official transfer on day one. And what we have here, for example, in July 1900, Crown agents, Crown agents of colonies, they made 3 hours British Museum Live containing specimens of all the postage stamps manufactured under their direction, use in Britain's colonial operations at the time. They gave the museum permission to remove, rearrange, and mount collection as they saw fit, and they also promised, more importantly, additional donations of philatelic material in the future. So our relationship with Crown agents is incredibly early. As the collections continued coming in, Bacon initially faced the challenge of managing very limited resources to hand. So in 1920, he decided to merge smaller collections and accumulations together into a single supplementary collection. It continued for the termination date through to 1922. And we have here a page of it. It's not too dissimilar. The page is very similar to what's mounted on. Sadly, you can see Bacon's hands beginning to deteriorate, his health starting to fail, he's about to death. But, you know, again, it's done quite a solid work. What you see here, this is within the tablet text upload, of course, is the typograph. So here on the first one, we have the proof of place card, the Hong Kong 1862 96 stamp. And of course, we have the major rarity next to it to show that that's again on the part of our major collections of these. Bacon took a different approach to larger, more significant collections because philatelic collections, although they're not quite archives, they do have archival qualities to them in terms of the write-up and the knowledge that's embedded. And consequently, he opted to preserve archival integrity of all of our major collections, named after their donors, tried to intervene with them as little as possible to preserve the wider collecting philatelic knowledge embedded with objects. Okay, and we continue to do that today. Now, in 1913, James Ludwig Lindsay, 26th Earl of Crawford, bequeathed his outstanding near-complete library of philatelic literature to the British Museum. Of course, he acquired a substantial part of that library from Tiffany, the great philatelic bibliophile in New York, and it comprises about 4,500 volumes. And this historically significant library contains some of the world's earliest philatelic catalogues, journals, and monographs. One of my personal favourites here is one of the first ever descriptive price listing catalogue of British colonial foreign postage stamps by Stanley Gibbons. This one was published in 1865, will make rarity. And of course, thanks to collaboration with the Royal Philatelic Society London. Chris, what's the name of the donor group? Where we got the funding for this? Philatelic Fund, which Chris was the chairman of. Sorry, COVID break. It's how we got the money. But as a result of this, we can now access significant sections of this library online for free via the Global Philatelic Library website. And I can tell you during lockdown and subsequently, it's a gift that keeps on giving. It's fantastic. So please, when you go home, Google it up, get onto the website and have a play. I guarantee you won't be disappointed. So if you wait for the next slide, thank you. So in 1919, the British Museum Library received another important bequest following the death of Richard Williams Harold Rowe. Chris actually discovered the photo, so Chris is going to name a few times here. But during his lifetime, Rowe bought one of the largest and earliest specialised collections of Siam, which covered the period between 1883 and 1918. It's housed within 22 volumes, collection of studies for the Siam 1880 permanent issue, the large and small road surcharge of 1894 to 1899, as well as a full selection of Siam postcards, letter cards, post offices, the late post office, amongst other material. And what you can see here, if you actually look at the page, we'll talk about the archive quality or the archival characteristics of the collection. What we have here is the original write-up, the original arrangement. It's not just about stamps, it's about the way they're arranged. Think about your own collection for hours, lifetimes of research, collecting. It's all embedded on the page. That's why it's important to consider them as archives, not just as philatelic objects. Okay. So, please. So, these are in 1953, witnessed the donation of 32 albums, a box of World Airmails by Dustin Fitzgerald, her name was Sybil. Here to the British Museum, this is a badge of the collector, and she was quite frankly an astonishing woman, an astonishing collector. I've got just two pieces here to show this. So anybody interested in kind of airmails of the world up to 1930 have to use this collection. What I've shown here from this, of course, is the iconic USA 1918 24/7 Jenny, to compare collection, one of our most iconic areas. Next to it, we also have we have the pilot's license here of John Alcott, which is actually valid during this historic Newfoundland, St John's Newfoundland flight in Ireland. If anyone ever sees the picture of the plane after when it landed in Ireland, it's a very interesting measure of success. And those I did this. One of the things that is included here, of course, is that our department claimed ownership of two original Goya engines. May ask why, and this is how cool she is. in 1930, slave issued with commemorative steps for airmail. And she loved the vignette design so much wow by the original. So, you know, what a collection. Really is amazing. And what an interesting lady. So, please, thank you. So, the museum, in addition to these private collections, if you will, the museum also has, much like the Philatelic Research, have a range of official government archives. And these were transferred officially from various government departments. So the Board of England Revenue, the one, Crown Agents, the London Treasury, and so on. And what we have here is the couple of pieces of material from the Board of England Revenue Archive. This is an archive, not a collection, an archive of fundamental research important for anybody interested in Britain's philatelic and security printing industries from 1694 right the way through to about the 1970s. So if you're interested in Boston adhesive revenue stamps, you need to come to us, newspaper stamps, get over to us. If you're interested in postal stationery, if you're interested in proof sheets in black, or Indian postage revenue stamps, you need to come and see us. We also have a range of GBO printed materials in other territories with the original registration sheet. So for a bit of a laugh, I thought a couple of bits out. What my personal favourite, actually this will be going on the exhibit next year at the National Archives, is this iconic and unique registration, 26 American Revenue, 1765 newspaper 1 penny stamps. These were engraved by a gentleman who was later called Thomas Major. And of course, after the 7 Years' War, Britain's won. We've got a massive empire. We've also got a massive, massive national debt. What happens? We've got to pay it off. And all of a sudden, Parliament turns around and says, well, you know, those the West Indies, Caribbean, American colonies, or defenders, why don't they pay the debt? 13 colonies in America took issue with this. It was tyrannical because there was no parliamentary representation. Because Parliament is an institution that evolved from the right to tax people, led to quite a few wars from the plantation and so on. Of course, they turn around and say no taxation without representation. There's a Tea Party in Boston. Then there's a big war, which we lose, and being the British government, they remove the American and they tax us with it instead. But what I love about these objects, these aren't just stamps on a page. They're quite literally shaped the modern geopolitical world. Without these, you have the United States of America. So quite a sobering thought when you look at not just the materiality and the rarity, but actually their cultural significance. Right next to it, of course, just to show you one of the more modern, this is another favourite one. This is an imperfect pane of 40 Great Britain 1913 Seahorse high value 10 shilling stamps, which was registered on the 4th of January 1926. I know that because it was written back, but of course, these original proof sheets are really, really important if you're wanting to look at the things like overprints, cliches, errors, varieties, you're able to, if it's effectively plated. So, you know, I think that's really cool. Thank you. So another large corpus of official archive, which I just referred to, of course, is the Crown Agents Philatelic Security Printing Archive. And once again, this has arrived in several accruals onwards, and it comprises archives for philatelic and security printing operations of Crown Agents and predecessor bodies. And it ranges in date from between 1921 to 2007. And again, I mean, this has a wealth of documentary evidence. It has the requisition books from 1921 to 1968. So opposed to have the Delary date books, we actually have anything that was commissioned. So if you want to know which Commonwealth stamps was issued, when, how many they manufactured, they're really important, not just for stamps, but also for revenues, postal station, paper money. We have order contracts from 1969 to 74, registered as dies and plates from 1923 to 1958, about 190 boxes of proof material for well over 120 countries, about 60,000 original works of art. See a bit up here. Anybody really interested in what postage stamps, revenue stamps, postage state paper money, postal orders, and much rich Commonwealth really need to come and use this material. Okay. Just to highlight an example, I actually found this, we didn't know we have it, it's really cool. I did an exhibition for Black History Month, and in the archive I found not only the original painting for Kenya, 1963, the painting edition painted by Victor White. You have all the research material for it. We also have proofs, but this particular proof was signed by Jomo Kenyatta. So the first president of Kenya actually signed it. When we went to the Crown Agent's bulletins, here he is actually signing it. So yeah, really, really nice. A range of material. You want to understand about the manufacture and the processes of design. Everything's there, really, except for some written file. Thank you. So, as a result of these bequests, donations, and transfers, the British Library's philatelic collections now include 18 major collections and archives, and that totals about 8.5 million objects. Funds have never been allocated for us to acquire material. Think about it, okay? Everything that you've seen so far originates from the generosity of government or the global philatelic community. This is your community putting into the museum, it's not us, it's you. Okay? Whilst I let that amazing huge thing in, let's have a look at some of that philatelic largesse being left to the nation. So here, you know, it's quite a daunting audit that our predecessors have laid for us, because these donations have included Great Britain 1858, one penny red plate 77. Got a couple of those. We've got an unused IEA 51, 52 HI US postage code 72 type 1. Of course, on cover here we have the EU 1854 and 4 annals blue pale red error head inverted long cover. Because hey, white have 1 and 2. We also have a Mauritius 1847 post office 1 penny orange red used on cover, laid on cover. And finally, unique set in Switzerland, Zurich 1843 unused horizontal 54 random stamps. Does anyone here see anything they like? In my album, you know, but I like my job, so okay. So thank you. So the growth of the British Library's philatelic collections continues. Both recent acquisitions. The personal archive of prolific stamp design that Jennifer Coons. There are a lot more, just one. And this was, she bequeathed it to the British Library's philatelic collections following her death in 2018. And this archive comprises original research material, rough artwork, design briefs, design notes, commissioning letters, of stamps that she produced well over about 80 countries throughout the course of her career. The variable quality, but also really confident the artwork and the Crown Agent's archive. You can see how collections sometimes bridge together. Okay. And I thought I picked this example. It's not actually my favourite stamp, admittedly. There's quite a few British Honduras A&R stamps, that's one of mine. But a fun example that's directly linked to the British Library includes this material here. This is from her archive for the Mauritius 1981 peerage. Okay. Now, when we were going through the papers, we actually found a British Library postcard, which is partially shown in the middle here, which depicts it. This is actually a British Library Persian manuscript. I'm going to quote you: APD MS 25,900 folio 41. And the image depicts the cantor of his army, and she used this manuscript to inspire the colour of the stamp, which I also, which is, you know, really cool. And what I like about this and other types of objects like this, they, you know, museums, libraries, archives get a bit for handling at the minute, post-colonial movements and identity politics. But actually, you know, this material really provides a fascinating insight into the influence of how museum and public collections could have on stamp design, manufacture, of course, building culture, generating culture. So archives are So the British Library's Philatelic collection display cases are situated on the upper ground floor of our St Pancras site, and it remains the major point of public access to our philatelic holdings. Half of the Tapley collection is on display at any one time. And in addition to that, we have a range of other materials. So at the minute, it's not complete with the list, but we have parts of the Crown Agency Philatelic Security Prints Archive on display, the Janowitz collection of Polish 1938 46 postage stamps, where it's the most collection postage stamps up to 1935. There are other materials. So, and you know, these 10 display cases, so there's 10 of them. In their total, they comprise about 1,000 frames, and they're capable of displaying at any one time between 80 to 100,000 collection items. Therefore, it's actually the largest permanent exhibition space in the British Library, attracts thousands of visits every year. One of the other, of course, is Perkins Davis, which you can see next to us when we talk about that next month to a few American friends. But, you know, very popular, we're very proud of that. In addition to this, we don't expect you to do your research at a public exhibition. I mean, that's crazy to do that, you know. So we actually have dedicated for anybody wishing to conduct research on the collections, okay? And we're open Monday to Friday from 10:30 to 4:30. However, with the high security in the library, our read room is literally that table. We can see some colleagues looking, EuroPhilEx looking around time. So we have an appointment system. You want to come and find, just email us because it's first come, first served. We're fully booked, then we'll have to turn you away. So contact us to avoid disappointment. Okay. Now, unlike other public organisations, well, so Tapley, to be honest, it's pandemic, sorry, but it's monthly A to M. Yeah. Okay. It ends with the first few pages of Mauritius. So everything after about page 5 to Newland is, of course. But we are overdue a swap over. It's just when I get the time. So yeah. So like other public philatelic organisations, the British Library's philatelic collections, as you can see here, plays a tiny part of a much larger institution. So consequently, although our core focus is on the philatelic and collecting communities, the department also has a long tradition of delivering services and research support to non-philatelic audiences as well. So this institutional stuff, I'm not going to tell you any lies. There are some challenges to this, there are some issues with it, but I still feel benefits actually outweigh the limitations because there's a lot of crossover with our material and the wider collections. And in the case of recognising potential philatelic research opportunities in archives, as curators, we're slightly ahead of the curve in that regard. Thank you. So, turning next to kind of how archives can transform philatelic research, there are actually more ways and methodologies to address this subject. The most obvious, of course, being adopting a didactic method, highlighting associated choice items of philatelic historical interest from archives around the world. And I could do that, I think, after an hour to get it forward. So I'm going to try and shape things up a bit. Okay. Now let's turn to the following image shown behind me now. And this is actually housed in the archives of the Royal Society in London. And it shows a detail from an entire day, taken in 1697. Captain Ali and his comic fame, to his in Chester, to his fate, Sir Isaac Newton, London, the main street, you see on the cover. And it's relating to their work at the working Royal Mail political intrigues that are going on. Now, postal historians in the room are gladly when he notes the bishop's mark, the presence of the bishop's mark. Others who into context might point out evidential value of this object, revealing how the post office played a major part in helping forge our national financial history during the Great Boycott of 1696, which of course was head of the Royal Mint Isaac Newton was responsible for. So here it is. Okay, archival-based research will unearth significant new philatelic discoveries while providing much wider context for the research we undertake. So, job done. Let's all go home or go and enjoy the rest of the show. Presentation over. Or is it? Okay. The approach just explicated has use. However, I would argue that it's incredibly deceptive in its straightforwardness, since it obscures significant challenges and issues in how we engage and what we can get out of archives as philatelists. Okay. Now, the presentation just ended left. None the wiser about what an archive is, why they matter to philatelic research. Nobody at all would really be aware of the untapped material waiting for discovery. All the challenges that we as a community are going to have to face, recognise and deal with to realise their full potential. Now, for you, the audience, to appreciate the value of archives and philatelic research, I'm going to have to contextualise them. Help you to understand them. Now, to really begin, okay, you need to really understand what is an archive. You need to have knowledge as to their origins, their development, their organisation, and most importantly, you're going to need to know how to access and interpret the material within it. So let's start over. What is an archive, please? So we as humans were in social species, and ever since our ancestors fell out of the tree, even earlier, humans have regularly had to interact and engage with one another. And these interactions often create threats to social and physical artifacts intended to capture key pieces of information, memory, and evidential value. Okay? Now, archives form when individuals and communities deliberately select and collect records of perceived importance for long-term preservation. That's what makes an archive. That's an archive. So stamp collection can be an archive that's well written up. Government archives will have all those bureaucratic machines. But the truth is, communities worldwide recognise the fundamental necessity to preserve their knowledge and stories of diverse cultural record-keeping systems ever since the dawn of civilization, even prior to the creation of modern record-keeping institutions. So consider, for instance, here, cave paintings created over 27,000 years ago in La Somme caves in southwestern France. Apologies, I'm Cockney, I barely speak English, so any French people in the audience in my mispronunciation. Communities worldwide, let's look at the Inca quipus record keeping system, which we use for accounting and to call probes. Okay, now that system was in use between 2600 to 1900 AD, so BC to AD. Think of that amount of record. We have one here. These are essentially chords which have knots in, knots to no meaning. They're designed to be read. Okay. Also, check out at the bottom what we have here is, and I'm going to quote this one. This is a hastily made message stick sent by an Oregon man to a Waper man, consenting to the marriage of his sister, and it's in the Queensland Museum archive. The Queensland, of course, is from the Larco Museum in Peru. These are all in archival institutions. They're essentially letters. Okay? Archives, therefore, represent nothing less than the touchstone of our shared human memory. Okay? As just observed, records as a mirror of humanity's existence extend well beyond our familiar documents, books, photographs, maps, and the digital formats we're familiar with today. The word archives, to complicate matters further, is also a term used for the storage places for such items, whilst the individuals managing their acquisition, arrangement, preservation, storage, and access. We called archivists, so I'm actually a qualified archivist. But imagine that combo, archivist, philatelist. It's great for the dinner table. It's also great if you need space on the plate. But as one might anticipate, from a nation steeped in history and enriched by our diverse cultures and communities, the United Kingdom boasts an extraordinary wealth of archival resources at the national, the regional, and the local level. So, if I may, thank you. So, I'm going to show you a few. We're going to start with the national. Okay? So what you can see here are various mainstream national institutions. So here we have the National Archives Institute in London. Next to it, we have the Record Centre in Edinburgh, and then of course Crowley, the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland. That collectively, those three institutions manage all of the records, government records, England, Scotland, Ireland, and Wales. Okay, and what are those archives predominantly? They're legal documents, they're letters, they're in ties, all over the large sections of this material. You're going to find stuff of postal history significance or revenue significance, and much else besides. These materials, and they have well over 1,000 years of history there, are supplemented by significant archival holdings and private papers of our national library. So, of course, where I work, British Library, never escape that place here in Birmingham. So, of course, we have the National Library of Scotland and, of course, Aberystwyth. So, people, you know, being an empire of the past, being a Commonwealth nation, you won't just find stuff here related to local postal history. You'll find early material related to India, Australia, China, original debt, correspondence, the revenue stamp. So a real rich body of material of national and international importance. Thank you. Next, at kind of the regional level, we have libraries, record centres, history centres throughout the UK. So here in Birmingham, of course, they have the Library of Birmingham, which manages the archive as well, lovely building. Actually, once had an amazing Philatelic Library, which we're working on. We've got it and working on it. Next, we have the Norfolk Archives, the Medway Archives, Kent, and below, of course, the whole history centre. And again, within here, you'll find stuff of more regional importance, so local business records, local family papers, so, you know, great uncle George Smythe's letters to Abyssinian, you know, so I'm buried within the archive, okay? And we're at a point where Google, you don't even need to know about Google, local archives, so, you know, it's so much easier to identify these archives than it was, say, 20, 30 years ago. Please, next one. Of course, in addition to these regional and national institutions, there are also countless institutions housing specialist archives throughout the country. So I've taken a few interesting examples here. So here we have Bishopsgate Institute in London, next to Liverpool Street, the Royal Society, saw the letter from Newton earlier, and then the Imperial War Museum. Below that, we have the Station Company, which is one of our delivery companies, the Bodleian, of course, and the Church, the Lambeth Palace Library, which took over the archives of the Church Record Centre. So all of these archives here, you know, have material significance to LGBTQIA plus community at Bishopsgate. There were correspondents and leading queer activists, for example. You have in like local papers, you have specialist collections of archives and papers for the wars in the Imperial War Museum. It's not just a museum, it's a library and archive. I know it's a catalog centre. Delivery companies have a range of records dating back to the Middle Ages. The Bodleian and other universities like it are often collecting materials for their research committees. So, for example, at SOAS, if you're interested in missionary archives, they have stuff for Chinese missionary, they have stuff for Methodist, so all postal history from Africa, Asia, and elsewhere. You know, they're there. Now, these examples are by no means left out way more than I've put in. And I've excluded private archives, inaccessible archives, such as the endangered one belonging to Thomas Galeroux and Company, which is a secure printing firm. I know that will take a bit of but I'll stand by it. The crucial point for the Philatelic Research, of course, is that collectively, such holdings comprise thousands of kilometres of shelving, all packed, correspondence, legal documentation, and other items of philatelic relevance. It really gives you an idea of the massive scale. So before Bob falls asleep at the back, I'm now going to put my money where my mouth is. I'm going to show you two examples just to demonstrate my point. So, in 1888, a serial killer took murdered 5 prostitutes in the impoverished district of Whitechapel, London. Known to posterity, Jack the Ripper, the killer's identity still remains unknown to this day. Okay. However, then as now, the brutality of the killings garnered considerable interest in the press, widely published in the crime. So here we have an example of the page. Okay, the press. Now, the media and police, as a result, received various letters, postcards, purporting to be from the killer. Most because over the Metropolitan Police Archive ended up archiving you. Okay, what we have here is the letter and envelope. The boss letter, the one that gave the name Jack the Ripper, from the Q archive, postally used. Okay, very brief, so very unsavoury, but you all know the significance of Jack the Ripper. But what's even more fun about this is in 2002, famous crime writer Patricia Cornwall published her book, Portrait of Killer, Jack the Ripper, Case Closed. And she claimed killer, controversial, was a famous Islingtonian. I'm not famous Islingtonian, but me and Chris are. An artist, basically, what's his name? COVID break. This is why I have notes. So, water sickle. So, someone to a man said, water sickle, killer. And they based this on DNA analysis conducted on the backs of the envelopes and stamps. And it's in the book. Don't take my word for it. Think about that. Okay? Please, to the next one. So, next is an example from extended holdings of archival manuscript materials where I work at the British Library. Samuel Johnson, of course, playwright, the essayist, moralist, biographer, and the literature critic. He had quite a harsh name. But he's actually best remembered for his work of the iconic 2-volume dictionary of the English language published in 1755. Which you can see here. This is, of course, a great man, Boswell. And this, although it was the first dictionary, it was heavily used well over a century. It was the major go-to form. Now, although Johnson attended Pembroke College in Oxford, he actually failed to complete his studies and didn't get a degree. So when this, around the time this was published, he spent 8-9 years working with his mates, basically approached the University of Oxford and said to him, like, "Are you getting a master's?" And it's like, hell yeah. So, you know, here's MA diploma. So this is Samuel Johnson's MA from Pembroke College, issued in 1755. Now, why is it significant? Philatelics, okay? From the 1694 Stamp Act, documents agreed certificates like this are subject to a 40 shillings, £2 stamp duty. And of course, you'll have already seen this document, the Blue Structural Revenue Stamp at the side. So, the philatelic value of documents like those are obvious. However, there's also a corpus of much older, unknown material, completely overlooked by philatelists and postal historians. And the cause, they're going to sleep, Pete, there we go. The cause of this neglect is actually threefold. Okay. First is the narrow focus of what constitutes philately and bona fide postal historical research. Okay. Secondly, it's an overemphasis on items that are available in the collecting economy at events like this, what you could buy on eBay, and you know, basically people do most of their research based on their collections of philatelic literature. They don't necessarily think of archives or libraries or museums as containing troves of information. And then finally, of course, particularly for stuff like this, is lacuna of skill sets to access and interpret earliest archival evidence we have. So philatelists and postal historians need to ground their work in wider cultural historical context, certainly. Yet, you know, you need to look beyond this narrow historical phenomenon of the modern postal service. Because, you know, the truth is, you know, when we ignore the uncollectible, when it becomes marginalized, you know, you get a very one-sided, impartial approach to what is essentially a universally important subject that's much, much older the postdocs. Okay, and what I find is that we're aware of ancient postal communication systems in China, in India, and so on. But the work that I see being done on this is actually done by archaeologists and academics who are undertaking the pioneer research. So when I see this, I'm often thinking, where is the postal historian? Okay, I'm going to highlight that point with this object here, because what we have here is an actual letter, and this dates from about 1927 BC to 1836 BC. And it's a letter addressed from a gentleman called, anyone who speaks ancient Assyrian, I apologize, called Ashala Elsi, and it's addressed from an unpublished to Bellum Canada within its clay envelope. This is the letter. This the envelope, the cover. Okay. Now this is what I want to know is, Contec, where it's excavated, this is now actually in the Harvard Archives. Contec was an important Bronze Age commercial site. This is actually a financial mercantile letter. Okay. Philatelists and historians know about cuneiform envelopes. That's not revolution. My question is, though, is who's actually conducting detailed research into, who's systematically working through the substantial archival holdings of this material in the British Museum, Iraq, and elsewhere? What philatelic research is underway on the archaeological reports that were created in these excavations? How do we collaborate with the academics, the archaeologists, the linguists to undertake meaningful philatelic research with these kind of letters and artifacts? Please, to the slide. Thank you. I'm going to move next a bit closer to home, to Winterlander, or close to Hadrian's Wall. And here, during the 1970s, archaeologists have excavated almost 2,000 handwritten tablets. They're now in the British Museum. They date from the 1st century to early 2nd century AD. There's a wealth of handwritten letters within them. And this is the site of Winterlander. And of course, I've got a lovely letter here, actually a very famous letter. So this is an early Romano-British wax tablet where they would write the letter, the letters stand up through. And it's about 96 by 223 millimeters, and it's inscribed in New Roman cursive, horrific handwriting. I won't get trained on that, I was struggled, but I got it. And it's actually a letter addressed, written by a scribe on behalf of a woman named Claudia Severa. And it's basically inviting her friend, Sulpicia Lepina, the birthday party. And Sulpicia Lepina was the wife of Flavius Imperialis, prefect to the 9th Batavia. And the letter was written between, well, we know it's the 11th of September, at any point between 97 to 103 AD. And what I like about this is this letter, two things. First of all, although the scribe's written it, he actually signs it. And this is one of the earliest known examples of Latin written by a woman. That's in a letter. So once again, and on the back, this is the back which you've got the address in. So, clearly a letter of significance. Once again, my question is, which postal historians are systematically working through this archive for the archaeological reports recorded in recovery? What about 400 other, even older fragments discovered in the city of London when they constructed the Guildford building? How will the philatelic world actually begin to engage and collaborate with these kinds of discoveries? Unlike the cuneiform scripts and silly lands within it, which there's very few scholars who can actually do that, so there's more material that they can translate. Latin, Roman cursive, these are skill sets that we can acquire quite easily in the West. If you look for them, I'm lucky enough to have Latin. But philatelic and postal historical research is an interdisciplinary subject, as is philately. But should we now start thinking of like this material? What are the fundamental skill sets that could ensure a comprehensive approach to engage with this kind of material more strategically you need to think about not just the material it's significant, but what do we need to interpret it, to read it, to understand it. It occurs to me personally, one of the very least things that philatelists should not or post-historical is thorough grounding in paleography, like the whole handwork, because, you know, especially when you get back to the 16, 15, 100s, without it, you're not going to be able to read the document. It's very easy, it's like Stuco, you just need to know how to do it. So objects like these are extreme examples, but they're not actually rare, they're just institutionalized. They're not, therefore, not commonly encountered in collective markets. So does this actually justify their marginalization in philatelic research? Does an object's format making it difficult to display a phrase within an exhibition like this? Does that really justify its neglect? I really hope not. Okay. Returning to the issue of contextualization, although they're quite rare, I've seen numerous examples of medieval manuscripts and display major post-edition displays, publications. And that's fantastic, you know. However, the use of such items in philatelic context needs to be done with caution. Okay, documentary forms and the language used to describe them has really evolved a lot over the time. Okay, so when an individual or philatelist may hear the term letters pattern, where's a letter? No, it's not. It's not necessarily a letter at all. You could assume it's the creation of modern letters, but what we understand to be a letter didn't actually exist at this time. It's a much more public document. Okay. Likewise, the same individual, I turn around and say, "There's a writ." No, they're going to think it's a court order. It's going to take value unless it's got a revenue stamp. The lack of proper context here results in a overt focus on one document typology and the complete neglect of another. Okay. Now, which of you here, put your hand up, yeah, got to say, but which of you here thinks that the letters pattern is significant, is a postal history item? Cowards. Okay. Which of you thinks the writ is? I do. I'm going to explain. Oh, I was going to say, who thinks the letters pattern is a postal history object, and who thinks the writ? I said the writ, not the letters pattern. Ah, okay, right. I've got one. Okay, you're a hard audience. Okay, so letters patterns and writs are in fact both forms of charter. Okay, of a kind, but for me, definitely 100% of the writ is a much more interesting document type composed. It's completely ignored by philatelists. And it's amazing as well because the writ is a unique English invention of Anglo-Saxon state. And it was originally used by the king after the great head of the confessor to transmit their will from the court, or where it's not a court in the central understand because they travel, but from the centre to the regions, okay, throughout the realm. Now we're going to look at the following two examples. So the first one here is in the British Libraries collection, and it's a writ actually sent from Edward, that's this one, to Archbishop Stigand and the community of Christ Church, written at some point around 1052 to 1066 AD. Now, no, it's short, written in English, it's functional, okay? You'll notice at the bottom there's various tails cut off. What are they for? They're there to close and seal the letter as it goes from King to Canterbury. And then the seal itself, you can see here, it doesn't just have the nice closing process, but it also authenticates the word of the king. It's designed for transportation from point A to point B via a royal messenger, like the modern post office initiates. So, you know, I think that's an interesting point. And we're going to look now at the second bit. Actually, this one's very, very famous. And this is actually housed in the London Metropolitan Museum or Archives. And it was sent from William the Conqueror. I'm going to read this to William the Bishop and Godfrey the Palfrey and all the burgesses were involved in both French and English. Now, it was dispatched in 1067, shortly after the Battle of Hastings, so it's trying to secure London, guarantee its rights, and so you can have a conquest, basically. But you'll notice the form is similar. The seal does exist, it's being detached from the document, but you can see these are documents, these are messages, these are letters. They're letters with legal ramification. So I would say, could the origins of Britain's postal service actually lie here? Without initiating genuine philatelic research on it, we're never actually going to know for certain. So please, if I may. So I'm going to stick with the theme of the object's physicality here. I'm going to use a more recent example, which I actually personally had the direct hand helping to discover. So when we think of letters, we often think of paper, parchment, papyrus. These are not the only formats used for letters. Particularly in Asia and the Middle East, rulers traditionally sent letters and produced documents in a much more diverse array of physical format well into the 20th century. And this is one example. This is now preserved in the Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz Library in Hanover. And it's a letter dispatched from King Alan one of the great George II. And it's dated the 7th May 1756. It's of British trading possessions settlement. Now, it's the letter, it's inscribed on a sheet of 24 karat gold. On each side, we have a range of rubies, the seal in gold, and the cover is this beautiful ivory tusk that would be used to store the letters and firm up to the book. And we should have that in the British Library because we've got contemporary translations, but the George and take the Shining, he actually pulled it out of the government archive, put it in his private life, damaged it with Prince Denmark, where a big procession. But you know, it's a letter. It's being delivered. Some people turn and go, well, it's definitely a diplomatic icon. I helped write the letter to get on the UNESCO World Register. You know, I claim to play rather sad, really. But anyway, as an object, it's a diplomatic icon. I think you can agree with that. But as a postal history artifact, it is as well, because diplomacy often laid the foundations for commerce. Commerce, of course, necessitates the existence of a postal system. Now, sadly, outside of our Western cultural milieu of what a letter should look like, you know, these kind of items are very easy to overlook. You know, please, thank you. But who remembers the really cool Inca keeper I showed earlier? Those lovely bits of string with a knot. So we're going to return to those now. Although the cultural knowledge necessary to decipher such texts may never actually be fully recoverable, consulting them in use with other sources, less traditional philatelic sources, can actually tease out material of philatelic significance. So, used to record economic and narrative data, people were frequently transported around the empire by chaplaincy or messengers for the effective administration of government. And if you look, these are two colonial era books on the history of Peru. The first one is shown here as the Florian Cockney, forgive my Spanish, Prima Nueva Crónica y Buen Gobierno by the Peruvian chronicler Felipe Guaman Palmadiala. It's written around 1600 and it's now housed in the Royal Danish Library. And it actually depicts the chat scene, a messenger, delivering a people. And I know that because up here we've got a little lady saying Carter. So there he is, you know, dropped it off. An even earlier manuscript entitled, again, forgive my Spanish, Historia Genealogia Real y los Reyes Incas del Perú, written in 1590 by the missionary chronicler Martin de Mura, now housed in the Library Pontificia Universidad Católica del Perú. Likewise, here depicts the delivery of a people to its recipient. And again, we know that because you can't see it, but it says there as a card on the net. Okay. So, you know, it's now time, I think, for philatelic research to consider assessing philatelic objects in conjunction with other types of non-traditional documentation. So we now have better resources for identifying and accessing philatelically relevant material compared to our predecessors. At the close of this quarter of the 21st century, philatelic researchers can now consult millions of catalogue entries from digital databases and increasing amounts of millions of objects digitally online, but not the British Library because we had a cyber attack. So I'm going to give you a non-BL example here. The postal historians interested in the mail of the English Civil War may find interest. What we have here is a letter from the digital collections of the New York Public Library, and it's dated the 2nd of October 1651, and it was sent by Oliver Cromwell in England, Puritan pastor John Cotton, who then resided in New England. And it was sent shortly after the Battle of Worcester. And it made references because the Scottish Army literated, talks about the difficulties of treatment of the Scottish and so on. And again, postal news is available online. Now, this is an amazing object. And what I'm about to say is in no way intended to kind of single out British Museum's holdings. Can you just check the next slide? Yeah. So this is the metadata come with it. Okay. What we have here is transcription. What we have here is the extended format, all the context, image you can zoom in on. It's fantastic. But you know, we have a problem with problem with metadata. There's a range of material in these collections we are not able to identify by a standard catalogue search. Why? Because the metadata, this is basically the catalogue description, does include philatelic terms. Okay, so you can put in terms, and there are several reasons for this. They're not necessarily thinking of the philatelic community when they're cataloguing these objects or traditional academic communities. And even the artists who do appreciate philatelic material are often they don't know how to engage or describe it, you know, so it's best left ignored. Therefore, some of these features like postal markings, so on, they're not recorded. There's no evidence or evidence that they're generally not looked at, and that has a massive impact on us. Because you could search terms in and get nothing when actually the archive's full of material. Now, this is something that us as archivists and you as philatelists and philatelic researchers, we're going to need some kind of engaged dialogue here. How do we deal with that strategically? Me with the archivist hat on says, we want to help. We need to work out ways how. Okay? And until we do that, we're never actually going to reach the full potential of these archives because they're inaccessible. And like I said, I'm not singling them out because even the British Library itself don't have anything because of the cyber attack. But let's go to the next slide. In readers of my 2020 article in the American Philatelic Literature Review in 2020, New Frontiers in Philatelic Research engaged in the online archives managed to bibliographic collections. We'll be familiar with some examples I'm going to give here because the British Library managed this with only varying degrees of success. Okay, so don't have the web page, but had to take the images from the article to show the point. So these screenshots here show the original digitized manuscript platform of the British Library that allowed users to search and access digitized copies of the British Library's global and diverse sections of manuscripts and archives. And it's certainly actually intuitive enough to use, but not designed for philatelic audiences because there's no philatelic terminology present within the actual catalogue metadata. And consequently, like this stamp, postmark, going to yield few, if any, results. Now, one of the ways to overcome this, and the same holds true for many of these digital platforms worldwide, is to use more generic search terms like correspondence. There's a good chance it isn't copied into the original, or have some postal significance on it, or charter or contract. These kind of documents that may or may not have had revenue stamps on. You know, but you're still facing the arduous task working through all that material bit by bit. It's not going to be efficient. Another approach on this, I would use the browse tab. This all the collection digitized, but again, still far from perfect. You have to go through. Now, although there was no, although there were no philatelic hits when I put the terms, they're actually incredibly rich. So I'm going to show you some examples. This platform is full of material revenue materials, stamp papers, creative history. So please, one of the archives digitized on this platform, Stefan's Spy section, or manuscript 1538 to 1936. And what we can see here in the centre is the so it's full of postal markings, revenue stamps with many of the world's most iconic classical composers. A personal favourite is this marriage contract. It was signed on the 3rd of August 1782 between Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart and White Weber. And you'll notice the revenue, you already noticed the one S revenue stamp on top. So again, another fantastic archive. One successful on the platform, Stevenson papers, which were created around 1776 and 1820. And these comprise a collection of letters addressed to William Stevenson, his father, Reverend Ellis Stevenson, from the Black British abolitionist right composer, anarchist Sancho, as well as his daughter. But, of course, he's also famous for being the first Black British man in an election. Now, the majority of these letters were actually delivered by private conveyance. Yet this entire show here date the November 16th, 1779, comic artist Sancho in London. It's addressed to Stevenson in Suffolk. And again, you'll notice at the bottom here we have the 16 Bishop's Mark. It's a very rare example, direct example of how British, Black British students using the postal service. And actually, from the 18th to 19th centuries, it's used in conjunction with its published letters, which frequently complain about cost of postage. Why did you send this letter from India? Is this amount? You add up for a week, it cost this. You add it up for a week's worth of place. And he talks about, why did you send it? Why did you send this letter undercover by the banking system? You get a real richer philatelic or postal history picture by using the archive with the book. So the book of letters, don't think, but full of postal history. And actually, by way of example, I've shown one of the letters down here. This following example, one of 2 letters addressed by Sancho to the Secretary of the Post Office in 1779, where he's requesting permission to open a post office in his shop. The original has to be in the National Archives of Kew Postal Museum. I challenge you, the audience, to find it. Okay, so platforms do offer exciting opportunities for philatelic research with archives. The challenge here is how archivists and collaborators can collaborate ways to make this metadata crucial for online discoverability, fit for purpose for our community. And we as philatelic researchers need to really get to grips with this. Please, the next slide. Thank you. Personally, I don't really approve the divisive confrontation tribalising techniques adopted by modern radical rescue. And nowadays, sadly, some workers become tainted with this naming on. Nevertheless, I do believe postal history has the potential to address legitimate social justice issues in a much more balanced, healthy way. Actually builds bridges, and in doing so, could actually integrate our hobby. So my previous case study hinted very strongly at the existence of a Black issue, something not actually currently recognised or discussed with mainstream philatelic research discourse. But just to reinforce the point I'm making, check out this letter here. Now, this was sent by Ayuba Suleiman Diallo, also known as Job Ben Solomon. He was born in 1701 in Bundul, Senegal, West Africa, and it came from a prominent poor family of Muslim religious leaders who founded the town of Bundul. 1730, travelled the Gambia River to trade in slaves and paper. And on his return trip, they were both captured by invading Mandingo warriors, sold back to North African company, slaves shipped across the passage to the Atlantic, and he settled in a place called Annapolis, the British colony of Maryland. You know, at British at that point, and he was sold to a Mr. Tolson. They was initially put to work in the tobacco field, but the RO found that quite unhealthy. He was placed in charge of the cattle, and he regularly tried to flee from the slave. And at one point, after being humiliated by a child, runs away to court, was imprisoned in Kent County Courthouse. And it's actually here being come to the attention of the Reverend Thomas Blue, a lawyer and member of the Anglican Society for Gospel. And learning that Diallo could write Arabic, Blewett made inquiries via an interpreter into his background, and he encouraged Diallo and allowed him to write this letter here in Arabic to Senegal, where his father was. And it was shipped across to England for conveyance to Africa, or what is now Senegal. And the letter came to the attention of James Osborne, the founder of the College of Georgia, and also one of the directors of the Royal African Company, held the English Republic on trade with West Africa. Lots of important letters and archives on that. After the letter was authenticated at Oxford, Diallo, £45, and poured them across to England. And this is the actual original letter that was written by him. And the names and the addresses you can see for the recipient are written. French, eliminate that Anglo-French kind of colonial rivalry. The letter's content in Arabic calls for all the movement of Bongo, I'm alive. And he urges his family and authorities to forbid his two wives from being married. Now, Diallo arrived in London in 1733, and whilst negotiations and preparations were underway to secure his freedom of passage home, he was able to meet the great of the day, including royalty, Duke Montague, and of course, and Sloane, found the British Museum, but to catalog his Arabic amulets. Now, when Diallo returned eventually to Gambia, discovers his family, his father's dead, one of his wife married. He went on to write one of the earliest slave biographies. Of course, it's the post-tense, the letters play a core role in it. Okay, please, to the next one. What we have here is another letter. When we think of royal letters, and think of letters from Asian or European monarchs, what we have here is a really good royal letter in British Library collection from King Christoph the Papacy, and it's addressed to the abolitionist Thomas Clarkson. One of several. It's written in French, headed stationery paper, and the letters detail kind of the history and politics of this Black Caribbean government. What I like about this one is the envelope is still with the letter. Of course, it was delivered privately, so less politically, but again, with that, with these kind of new audiences we could reach by engaging with art. We'll go to the next one. What we have here, we can also bring an element back into history. So you think of the Opium Wars in Nanjing. There were two people there. The top person designing for the Qing government, Qi Ying, the Mandarin. And of course, next to him is an image of Stephen Potiphar. Now, after the Opium War signed the treaty with Nanjing, they stayed in touch. Who knew? And some of those letters were in the British Library's Chinese section. In fact, this is a cover of one of them, and it was said Qi Ying. So after Hong Kong goes to England and goes to South Africa. So Qi Ying's written him a letter, since been tactic, and I'll tell you an interesting story about it. So it went Guangzhou, Canton to Hong Kong, then forwarded over to India on the overland route, and it was part of the SS Liverpool wreck. But it's a wreck cover. And sadly, portrayed his wife that he'd sent to his friend before he went. So South Africa was eroded, and that explains the condition. And the reason why we know it's red cover is that it's in the diplomatic country, right there. So, you know, you've got these really interesting personal stories could contextualize, because a lot of people are very ideological, so very concept heavy. Of course, we could bring humanity to history, to this kind of studies. This is one of about six. There's one, sorry, five hands was displayed in Taiwan around 1980. So quite a fascinating body of material. What we have here, again, talking about this is actually a very rare doc. This is a letter. Have you ever heard of typing? Probably not. Okay, so during the 1860s, there's a failed landing on EuroPhilEx. They anyway, long story, he fails, discovers Jesus, and then sets himself up with Jesus is his brother. And currently rebels against the corrupt Qing government, sets up the heaven kingdom, and all trying to king of the south. Triggered one of the bloodiest civil wars in history. I think it's 30 to 60 million Chinese people killed in this conflict. Based in his court. This is a letter from the typing on yellow seal, written and sealed with various seals. Some of my colleagues will just do that, but be able to know. This is the colour, and this covers. If you know how to interpret it, so you've got the names of them, the addressee. Here you've got the date and time sent. You've even got a different hand here showing the postal. I did it out. What stopped this object? So I'm going to end it there and say, well, just to conclude, what I'm going to say is our archives used in philatelic research, yes, but what we put in is what we get out. The way we define our subject is going to really set the parameters of what we get out, how we use and how we interpret. So we need to think about how, what is post-history, what is philatelic research, and how do archives fit into that model, or how can archives change the way we perhaps view who we are and what we do, then engage with. We also need to think about various skill sets. Linguistics, academic skill sets. How do we then engage? So there are courses in Latin, there are courses in paleography. Is there ways we can set up with these groups, get discounts or publicize, get engaged more with us? The third is, of course, the identifying material, and arguably most important, most challenging, is going to be how do we engage artists to recognise these pictures, to record them, even if it's a basic as a stat to start. Okay? I've got various suggestions about how we can do this, but really it's not really the place of one individual. It's like I can be organised community to take on board. So that's the end of my first part.